Orksidists, and welcome to the third and final episode of our three-part series on getting started with painting the Wii figures. Our little orc boy has been clipped, cleaned, combined, covered in primer, and coated in color. Now it's time to kick things up a notch. Now, there are a lot of different techniques that people use, and they all have their place. Obviously, I'm not going to try to cover all of them today. Instead, I've selected just a few specific ways to upgrade the look of this model that are very accessible. They don't require fine motor control, don't require special products or additional purchases, and can be done with all the tools and paints that I already told you to get in the last episode of the series. The other reason I'm going to show you different techniques on the same model is a bit more subtle. Many beginning painters pick one technique and stick with it for the whole model and, by extension, the whole squad or the whole army. That's fine, and it gets the job done quickly, but just like we pick different colors and different brightnesses, which artists often call values, of color to create contrast between different parts of the model, using different techniques to shade and highlight different materials on the model will add visual interest to it by creating contrast between the different textures. Living skin has a different texture than old leather or worn cloth, for example. So, using different techniques to treat each of the materials differently with your brushwork can emphasize those differences, which adds realism and interest without necessarily adding more work. Keep watching to see what I mean. Okay, so picking our guy back up here, we've given him plenty of time to dry. And as you can see, the paint job's not perfect. It's pretty close. All the major parts are covered. The lines are fairly neat, but not perfect. You can see some spots start like right here where you can still see the black, and so on. And that's fine, perfectly fine. You know why? First of all, in real life, things aren't perfect. And I think a lot of miniature painters try too hard to make everything perfect, and in doing so, first of all, they spend a lot of time that's not necessary, and second of all, they actually end up making things look less realistic by trying to make everything look perfect. Second reason is that we're actually not going to stop here. Now, you could, if you wanted to. This right here is actually a perfectly well-painted miniature for your very first attempt at painting one of these Wii figures. But we can do better, even as new painters, we can do better by emphasizing a little bit of the shadows and the highlights. What do I mean by that? Well, these guys are supposed to be full-size, people. An orc is supposed to be, anywhere from 7 to 9 feet tall or so, if he was at full scale. And so real things that size end up reflecting a lot more light and casting a lot bigger shadows than they do when they're shrunk down to the scale. So in order to emphasize that and be able to read it like it's really that size from a distance, what we do is we tend to add in lighter shades of the same color on the tops of things, where the light would hit, kind of like we do when we're dry brushing. So like on this part of the muscle here, for example, on the raised parts of the muscles here, on the knuckles, etc. And then we'll, if we want to, we can put darker shades of the green in the recesses also, or we can just keep going lighter. It really depends on what ultimate colors we want to wind up with and what we want it to read as. So I'll start off with that on the green to kind of give you the sense of what we're looking for in that sense, or in that case. And then we'll go on with the browns and the blues and everything else as we go, and we'll make decisions along the way. As for the metals, we have two choices here. What a lot of people do is they'll take an actual paint that has little metallic flakes in it, and they'll just paint all that, and it'll look metallic, it'll look great. Other people will do what the old-timey artists did, like Da Vinci and Leonardo and Michelangelo and all those guys. They didn't have metallic paints, and so they would use tricks of shading and highlighting to make things look metallic. And even now, just with a simple dry brush from a distance, that gun already kind of looks like it's a black metal a little bit, right? Not a lot, but a little bit. Same thing with the axe. So that's called non-metal metallic. And it doesn't look great right now. It doesn't look perfectly metallic, but it's kind of in a close enough vein. So we'll come back to that later. We'll decide whether or not we want to just sort of emphasize that and make it look a little bit more like it's a, like a blackened metal with some scuffed edges, or if we want to make it, get some metallic paint to put on there or not. We'll figure that later. For now, I'm going to start with the green muscles and the face and so forth, and I'll work our way around to the clothing and all that kind of stuff, and we'll figure out the metal last. So to start with the skin, what we're going to do is we're going to mix up another batch of our yellow and blue combination, and this time we're going to have a smaller batch all totaled, and it's going to have a lot less blue in it and a lot more yellow, comparatively speaking. So I take the same yellow, and this time I'm actually going to put the blue. I'm not just going to squeeze it in like I did before. I'm going to put the blue over to the side so that I can kind of mix it in as I want to add more to it until I get the color that I want. Once again, I'm going to take a little bit of water to add in there, just a little drop out of my squeeze bottle here. That might be too much, we'll see. We'll figure it out. Adding too much water is not really a huge problem because you can always kind of squeeze it off your brush later on and kind of wick it away, as it were. So, and it's in my experience anyway, it's better to go too thin than too thick because, like I said, you can always wick the moisture off your brush, but if you wind up painting too thick on your miniature, then you wind up obscuring detail, and that's just bad no matter what you're trying to do. Okay, so let me get some of this blue in there, turn some green. Oh, looks like we're already leaching the blue in there. We might have to fix that. That was my mistake. The other thing, we can add some white to this. The problem with adding too much white to things by itself is that it winds up looking too chalky and too like what they call desaturated, meaning that like takes the color out of it too much. Yeah, that's not too bad. So you can tell if it's a good highlight or not by kind of holding it next to the color. And if it looks brighter, as much brighter as you want, then you probably got a good highlight color. I'm probably gonna add a little more yellow to that because I tend to go pretty bright on my highlights, but then use the thin paint. And what that means is that it winds up being fairly translucent, and so you see the underlying color underneath it. Even if the highlight color itself looks really, really bright, the fact that the other color is showing through it because of the translucency means that you're still not getting the full the full impact of that brighter color. It's still kind of somewhere between the underneath color and the one you're putting on top. So yeah, so something like that's probably about right. Ooh, where are we at now? Camera, where are you? There we are. Yeah, so something about like that is probably in the ballpark here. Put it next to my hand so you can see a little better. Yeah. So we'll go something like that, and then we can always do more than one layer if we want to, just to make sure that we're not again going too far too fast. So starting up top here, we're just kind of layering it on. And there's a lot of different techniques for how you can highlight things. What I'm doing right now is the simplest one. It's just called layering, and that's just literally painting the lighter color on top of the older one. And you just, in this case, we're just staying out of the areas that we want to keep dark. So we're just staying out of the darkest parts in between the muscles. So I'm literally just painting on the top of it. And it's okay if it's a little splotchy right now. We can fix that later if we want to, or we can leave it splotchy because once again, nobody's perfect. Not everything is perfect, and there's always imperfections in people's skin, and so that's okay. What did Bob Ross used to say? Happy Little Orksidents. I feel the same way about miniature painting. It's okay to make little mistakes. It's okay to make things imperfect because real life's not perfect. So we're just going kind of very quickly over the very highest highlights, raising. And again, side of the brush is your friend, especially on the sharp edges of things. You just kind of get the back of the knuckles here. Going back from the back of the knuckles into that towards the palm, or towards the wrist. And then the fingers. And as you can see, it's kind of emphasizing the hand muscles a little bit more there. Just a little bit at a time. And again, you can always put on more than one layer if you think it's not emphasizing things enough. And then if you want a darker orc, you can always come in and emphasize more by darkening the shadows as well. And we might do that later. We'll see. We'll see how this turns out and then decide what we want to do. That's the other thing to remember, is that by going thin on your paints, you can always go in both directions. You don't have to go in just one direction. You can always put a little bit more paint on in little layers and change your mind as you go. As I said in the beginning, I'm also a fan of making the faces a little extra bright, even under the helmets where it normally wouldn't show up, just to give a little more pop of character to these guys. You know, you want them to stand out and have some expressions, you know. So if the face is a little brighter than everything else, that's okay, because we want people's attention drawn to it. Once again, on the back muscles here, we're just kind of going for the parts that are sticking up. Staying out of the parts that are in the deepest recesses so they look shadowed. Just kind of tapping the side of my brush along everything. One misconception, a lot of people think that you need to get a really small brush to do all the detail work here. I'm actually using a number 2 brush, which is not tiny by any stretch of the imagination. It's smaller than obviously like some you'd paint your house with, but it's not a tiny brush at all. They go much smaller than this. When I first started painting, I was one of those ones who thought you had to use a really tiny brush, and so I used, like, I think the largest brush I used back then was, I think, a 0 size brush, which is pretty small. I don't think I have one here anymore. But a 0 size brush, and I used to try to find smaller and smaller brushes wherever I went. So I'd get like a 5/0 or 10/0. I got a 15/0 at one point, which are just, you know, they're tiny. They just have hardly any hair on them, and that just slows everything down. They don't hold a lot of paint, and while you think that it goes faster because you're more accurate with them, it actually doesn't. It doesn't actually speed anything up. You go super slow because they don't hold a lot of paint, they don't cover a lot of area, and frankly, you're not really more accurate with them, even though you think you are. At least in my opinion. I think that if you're trying to do some very specialized things like eyeballs, then they make sense. But even then, well, when we get to eyeballs, I'll talk about that. But even then, there's other brushes that work better for those kinds of things, in my opinion, these days. So there are uses for those tiny little brushes, but they're very few. And so as a beginning artist, I would not recommend getting them. I honestly, 90% of my brush work, I use a size 2 brush, like this one, size 2 round. And then if I'm doing dry brushing, like I said, I use those makeup brushes you saw earlier. And then I'll do, I'll even use like a size 4 or bigger for certain types of things. Very rarely do I do something that's smaller. Maybe I'll do a size 1 sometimes. And then it's almost never that I go any smaller than that, unless I'm doing something like eyeballs or something, then I might go smaller. Or if I'm doing if I'm doing freehand designs, then I'll go smaller also. But even then, it's not usually one of those really tiny, like 5/0, 10/0, 15/0, whatever. I don't usually go that small anymore at all, even on freehand designs, because there's just better ways to do this these days, in my experience. Here again, highlight these muscles a little bit more. This is what I was talking about doing more than one layer if you want to, because I'm just kind of looking at these and I'm like, yeah, they're not really popping quite enough. So I'm doing a second layer, and once again, it's thin. So each layer you do kind of reinforces the one below it. Think of it like, if you have panes of colored glass and you stack a couple panes of colored glass on top of each other, and each one reinforces the one below it. That's kind of what we're doing here. We're stacking these, layers of paint are essentially these panes of colored glass. You stack one on top of the other, and it reinforces the one below it, and they add together each of their effects. The other thing I recommend, which you probably see my hand shaking a little bit, you can rest your hand, the degree to which you can rest your hands is the degree to which you'll be stable. So I try to, as much as possible, put my hands on the table, wrist on the table, touch hands to each other, all that kind of stuff, just to stabilize everything as much as I can. I also will typically have some kind of a miniature holding device of some kind. And again, the only reason I'm not doing it here is because I'm trying to demonstrate, sort of the minimum effective way to get started in the hobby. So I'm trying to do the minimum number of purchases you guys need to do to get started in the hobby and to just try it out, If you have like some poster tack and an old jar or an old bottle or something like that, you can poster tack one of these Wii figures on top of the bottle or jar, and that'll be a really effective hand-holding kind of thing. And so, in future videos, you can watch me do that, or you can watch me use one of the hand-holding devices that you get on the internet or that you get from your GW shop or whatever. But not today. Today I'm just kind of old schooling it with my hands. To be honest with you, I also, when I'm doing a large army, I also don't bother with the hand-holding things, just because I don't have a ton of them, and so swapping out miniatures in between, if I'm doing like a batch paint, just doesn't really do it for me. All right, there we go. So hopefully you can kind of see the difference between earlier and now already, just from in terms of highlighting and sort of seeing a little bit more definition on those muscles. So that's the first technique. That's just simple layer highlighting. Now, if we wanted to demonstrate shading, I'm gonna do that on the wristbands, just to give you an idea of the difference between the shading and the highlighting. And the way I'm gonna do that, is I have this burnt umber brown paint over here that I had from before, that we used to paint a lot of the leather and stuff, and leather boots and everything. And what we're gonna do with that is I'm gonna go with these wristbands, and I'm gonna do that burnt umber to shade the wristbands. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a really simple ghetto wash. And what a wash is essentially just a really thin paint, really super thin paint. There's a lot of products on the market that you can buy that are washes that are better at doing washing than this, because they have different kinds of surfactants, like chemicals in them that help to break surface tension. They have different kinds of mediums in them that help to give the wash different properties, to help it settle different ways, etc., etc. And so they all work better, but they all also cost money. So we're not gonna use them today. We're just going old school and just doing pure water to wash. Now, if you wanna be really inexpensive and do this yourself also, what you can do to have a really cheap surfactant is you could just take and tip your brush into dish soap. Just touch it, kind of rub it on your dish soap container even, and then mix that into the water, and that will break the surface tension of the water. Why do you want to do that? Well, if you're not careful with pure water and paint like this, it can, because of the surface tension of the water, stick to parts of the model that you don't want it to stick to. So it'll stick to the top parts, and it'll create what are called coffee stains. So like, how when if you have a cup of coffee or something, or something similar to that, and you put it on your like your kind of, well, actually like this, you got like you make like a ring of something, right? So they call it that because that's what happens. It'll like create like a ring or like a spot where the paint dries in a weird pattern. That's what'll happen because because the surface tension of the water, the paint will kind of get on the edge where the water sticks. Surfactants like this dish soap and whatnot will break the surface tension. It'll cause it to settle in the recesses. But if you're careful, you don't necessarily need that either. So what I'm going to do, and again, just to give you an idea of how thin this is, they say the thickness of skim milk. You can paint it on your hand. You can see how thin it is, right? Super duper thin on my thumbnail. You can see that, right? So I'm going to take that, I get it on my brush, and I'm just going to be careful by kind of just laying it into the recesses of my wraps here. And I can even put it like kind of on the arms, on the edge of where the wrap meets the skin of the boy. And it's a very subtle effect right now, but once again, I can do it several times to deepen the effect. I'll do it over here too. I can do it several times to deepen the effect. Generally speaking, with a wash like this, you know, there's different kinds of thin paint that you can use, and depending on how you're using them, they call them different things. But basically, they all kind of change the tone, if you will, a little bit. But basically, a wash is intended to go specifically into the recesses and darken the recesses, darken the shading areas. So what you want to do is kind of guide your wash into that area. And if you have like excessive pooling like I do over here right now, if you can see that, then you want to wick it up. You want to soak it up with your brush, because if you don't, that's when you start having that coffee staining I was talking about if you're not careful. So that's the main issue that the surfactants help you with, is that they'll sort of help prevent the coffee staining without you having to wick it up quite as much on your own. Now see, I did that, and it's going to darken that whole area in the middle. It's going to look great, I promise. Well, I mean, maybe not great, but it'll look decent. Anyway, I'm going to come in here, put them in, oops, didn't mean to bump that. Put some of that wash in there. I'm going to wash my little skull area here. Once again, I have some pooling in the thigh, so I dry myself off. I don't know if you're watching, but I got a paper towel over here, and I'm just going to dry my brush off on that before coming over here to wick the excess away. And drying it off again, get a little more, and coming up under here, and continuing around the model to wherever I think I want to darken up the that light colored tan. And I know I want to get it on the necklace, so I do that. Right. Get him up here. Probably the horns. Even though they weren't the light colored tan, they're still lighter than the other stuff there. There we go. Okay. Wrist straps. Yeah, we'll probably do another shot on the wrist straps. I think that's dry enough, probably. That's the other thing about the washes, because they're so thin, they actually tend to dry reasonably quickly. Not like instantaneously like that, but reasonably quickly. So let's do it again. Yeah, so you can see already from before, it's already showing a little bit more depth to it, right? A little more character, so to speak, right? Okay, so I could keep going around, and you know, if I was doing, you know, like a showpiece or something, I'd probably go down and I'd like shade and highlight every single thing. For this model, I'm just trying to make it look a little bit better, and I'm trying to show you different techniques as we go, okay? So the next one I'm gonna show you is actually for the leather, okay? And I'm gonna show you for the leather of his shirt specifically, because one of the things that's kind of cool about leather is that it doesn't look as good when it's smooth and highlighted like the skin does. But it looks more the cloth of the, I was kind of imagining the wristbands to be cloth wrappings. But leather looks better when it's all like scuffed and stuff, right? If you ever look at like pieces of leather, like a leather notebook cover or leather shoes or whatever, they look realistic when they're like kind of scuffed and cracked and dry and stuff, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take that same idea and we're gonna apply it to our pretend leather down here that's gonna be on his shirt. So the way we make that happen, we got this dark brown right here that we've got over here already. And we're gonna add some of the yellow and the white to it to lighten it up, but also to add a little bit of warmth to it, to make it look like it's a little bit scuffed up instead of just purely lighter only. We're gonna make it look like it's a little bit, you know, tinged with some of the warmth of the yellow as well. So, that white's almost done. I get another one here though, don't worry. And actually, I usually use a different color when I'm doing this for my leathers, but we're gonna try this out and see if it works. I think it will. And again, this is mostly because I'm trying to limit which colors I throw on the palette here for you guys, so that you don't have to go out and purchase a whole slew of colors. I'm trying to just give you an idea of how to get started on the cheap, as I've said like a million times in this video already. So just gonna find a kind of another clean area of the palette. Go over here. This time I'm not going to go super thin on this paint. I'll get a little bit of paint or water to thin it, but not super duper thin, because I'm going to use a different technique that requires the paint to be slightly thicker than the other ones we've been using. So a little bit of that, a little bit of the white. Bloop, bloop, bloop. So I'm mixing those together real quick. Okay. And then get a healthy dose of the yellow in there, because yellow is pretty kind of a weaker paint color for whatever reason. The pigments in them are just kind of weaker. I don't know why. So we're gonna get a little bit of yellow color in there. Yeah, that makes it kind of an ochre. Not exactly what I was going for. Let's go back to get a little more white in there, I think. That's the other thing I like about mixing my own paints, is I can kind of just dance around with it until I get what I want, you know? I don't have to like look at it on the shelf and be like, well, that's kind of like it, and then I get home and I squeeze it out, I'm like, whoops, that's not what I wanted. I just kind of fiddle with it. Yeah, I think for our purposes, that's probably okay. That's probably good enough for our purposes for this this little demo. I would like that generally to be a little bit more red, to be honest with you. Yeah, you know what? Okay, fine. I'm gonna introduce a new color. Sorry. So this is what I usually use. I usually use a burnt sienna, and the reason I'm gonna go ahead and introduce it anyway is only because, number one, I usually use it and it works great for this purpose. But also, burnt sienna is a good one to have in your palette no matter what, because burnt sienna is my secret weapon when it comes to flesh tones. You can make just about any human flesh tone out of burnt sienna, in my experience, just depending on what you add to it. So take that for what it's worth. Yeah, you can make tan skin tones, you can make African skin tones, you can make just about anything. Just add a little bit of other colors to it, and it'll surprise you. But anyway, so we take that, add a little bit of white to it, and we get kind of this reddish, creamy kind of color, right? Like that. Okay, something like that. And you can go a little darker if you want, doesn't really matter. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of water to it. A little bit of water, I said. A little bit of water to it. Maybe go a little darker, just a tad darker. Okay. And then what I'm going to do with this is starting off with like the damaged areas, or the parts that are obviously damaged, like the shoulders where it's cut, or where the leather's been torn and stuff, and like the holes in it and whatnot, is I'm going to start just kind of stabbing this on there, okay? And so it's going to look like it's scratches and whatnot, right? And so I can go in either direction with it, but I tend to like to go sort of outwards from it. So I'm just kind of make scratches, right? Kind of light scratches. You can kind of do them quick and stabby, I guess is the best way to put it. And you know, like I said, you can do different colors with it. You can darken it up a little bit. You can lighten it up a little bit. Whatever. It's not a science. And you can also do it, you know, kind of anywhere on the leather, because again, leather ends up being distressed as it's worn. It ends up getting scratches all through the surface, right? So like I kind of scratched up there where he was handling it. And then we'll go around here to this little hole that was made, I do the same thing, just kind of touch around it, like so. Right, just around the hole where it's damaged, and then just kind of work some scratches around it too, where it's been distressed. And it's just kind of random. You don't have to go get all like precise or anything. You know, that's something I like about leather. Is the more imprecise you look, the better it looks. The more imprecise your brush strokes, the better it looks. And then also wherever it's folded, it's probably going to be more damaged, right? So instead of highlighting this over here, you just make those little scratchy shapes on it. And it's like, yeah, that's where the leather's been bending a lot. So that's where it's kind of dried and cracked. You know what I mean? Go back for a little more of the paint. Do the same thing over here, right? I'm going to take this hole that's in here. And I'm going to outline the hole with the scratches. And then just start building up more distress around it. Just kind of randomly. There's really light, super light touches. It's very, very light. I'm barely touching the thing. Just kind of spider webbing scratches out away from it. It goes very, very quick, as you can see. And same thing on the other side of the sleeves over here. Right, same thing as I was doing before. Just kind of like so. Okay, so hopefully you can see that pretty well, and you can see just very, very quickly how that really kind of nondescript brown just sort of really starts to pop and look more like leather, leather that's been beat up and kind of worn for a while, right? And I can continue doing that. I can continue to punch it up some more. I can continue to add more scratches. I can add different color scratches. I can go with lighter versions of the same combination if I want to, and show different wear patterns in different places. Just the sky's the limit. It's really up to you how distressed you want to make it look. You know what I mean? So for now, I'm just gonna stop there because again, I was just trying to show you the technique. But that's my approach to making leather. Like I said, it's just kind of a nice dark brown followed by some of this burnt sienna mixed with white. In fact, you know what? Here, let's try this. I was skeptical about this brown over here before that I mixed up first. I'm gonna try to add some of that in and just kind of see what it looks like, because you know what? No guts, no glory, right? So let's just see what that looks like added into there, because we can see if it's got a little bit of additional pop if we do that. Let's see, maybe here on some of the higher highlights. Just a little bit of extra distress there, a little bit extra distress here. Yeah, that actually doesn't look too bad, right? Maybe on the shoulders here, we'll pop a little bit in there. And we'll mix some of this back in there because we didn't get in there with this one at all yet. Get in there and zigzag it. Oops. Just kind of zigzag a little bit. And if you go in too hard on it, you can wait for it to dry, right? We'll come back and wait for it to dry. You can always come back and wash it with a little bit more of the brown wash that we did before. If you don't like how dark, if you don't like how light it gets, But yeah, I guess I probably should have given myself more credit on that mix of the yellow over here, because I don't actually hate that now that I look at it. So we'll use. I keep bumping my camera. Sorry about that. I'll kind of keep going over here with this one a little bit under the armpits. Down here. Mix it up with this guy as well. The other thing you might notice I'm doing occasionally is kind of like moving my brush off camera and kind of wiping it at things, and that's just because you want to make sure you don't have your brush too overloaded. For most techniques, if you have your brush too overloaded, then it winds up leaking too much paint onto wherever you're doing, and so you don't want to ever flood the area with too much paint. And so I tend to control it by like wiping it on my thumb or wiping it on the paper towel or whatever that I've got nearby. Okay. Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. All right, and again, this is like, you know, I'm sure I'm trying to make this look fast and easy, and to be honest with you, though, I think it is, because as I said, there are no mistakes to this. I'm not doing anything I don't think that is outside of a beginner's control here. I'm not doing anything too crazy. It's literally just kind of tapping a brush along the thing. And if you make a mistake, if you do too much, like let's say worst case scenario, right? I just said don't overload your brush, don't do too much, right? Let's say worst case scenario, I've got too much on my brush and I just like blurp, accidentally stabbed the guy too hard in the chest. He's got way too much stuff on him, right? I clean the brush off, I come back, and I just kind of keep stabbing at it a little bit to remove some of it, spread it out a little bit, right? And I'm just changing the distress pattern now, right? I'm making the chest look a little bit more distressed than the other parts. It becomes lighter than everything else, but so what? When it dries, I'm gonna fix it with a little bit more of the brown paint. You'll see. We'll wait for it to dry and we'll come back to it. Last part, we'll go ahead and do the skirt, because he's got a little bit of a loincloth thing going on here. We'll, let's see, we'll do some of the stuff down here. Oh yeah, I almost forgot the boots. He's got boots too. Those are definitely leather boots. We gotta distress them as well. And boots are easy too, because they got a lot of bendy bits. So you just kind of focus on the bendy bits. Bendy bits, heels, any place that you think they're going to take damage. Top of them where they're, oh, I keep bumping the camera, I'm sorry. I am not used to this setup yet. I'm a new tuber to YouTube, and I promise I'll get better. I promise. Stay with me. Yeah. Just kind of work around the things here with the wherever you think it's going to get scuffed, damaged, banged up, whatever. That's where you're going to see this distress and damage and whatnot. It's really, really easy. It's hard to overdo it. It's hard to underdo it. It's just whenever you think you're done is when you're done. There we go. Something like that. Okay, now I promised that we're going to fix the chest so that it doesn't look quite as heavily distressed as that, right? So we go back in. We got two choices, right? We can either take the thicker brown, thin it with some white, because the original brown was kind of a mix of brown and white, if you recall, and then stab it in like we did with the burnt sienna, or we can just use a wash and we can do a technique called glazing. So let's do that, because that's a new technique for you guys. So if you remember, I told you that the same kind of thing where you thin down paint a lot could be used a few different ways. Well, this way is called a glaze. It's basically the same thing as a wash, but the difference is after you load your brush up, you take a piece of paper towel or kitchen roll, as the Brits like to say, you kind of wick it off a little bit so that you still have some on the brush, but it's a lot thinner than it was when you were doing the wash before. Or excuse me, a lot less than you do. And you, so basically it's enough to get on your finger still, but it's just very, very, very little bit. And you just kind of brush it on top here. And you're not concentrating on in the back, or excuse me, you're not concentrating on the shadows anymore. You're trying to get all the way over the top. And what this is doing is it's again creating one of those very thin panes of glass over the top to darken it up. Okay, so that's one way to do it. This particular one, it would probably take several layers of glazing to darken it up enough. So once that's dry, I'm going to do the first technique I told you and just kind of stab it out a little bit with the darker brown to kind of hide my over exuberance on the burnt sienna. So, but that won't take too long. While we're waiting for that, we can go on to the blue jeans. Now the blue jeans, kind of the same story, you know, they're not going to be distressed in the same way as leather, but instead blue jeans, we're going to use a technique that we call stippling. So I'm going to take the same blue that we used for the blue jeans before. I'm going to squeeze it out here. I'm going to put white in it again, more white than we did before with the previous version of the blue jeans, because we want it to be lighter. And this time, I'm going to take another makeup brush. That one might be a little bit too big given where we have to reach. Yeah, we're not going to use that one. Instead, we're going to pretend that you just happen to have an old brush somewhere in your house. Okay, any kind of old brush that you're willing to just kind of mess with. And the way we're going to do it is we're just basically going to mix these together by a stabbing motion like this, just kind of up and down stabby, 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 like this. And this stabbing motion is how we're going to apply the paint also, not just how we're mixing the paint. We're going to apply the paint in the same manner, okay? So once you've stabbed it a lot like that, again, you're going to take your paper towel, you're going to dry it off a little bit, just like you did with the dry brushing, except that you're doing it on the paper towel. And now you're going to go back into your blue here, and again, you're not going to go really hard, you're just going to kind of stab, just like that. And again, you're still concentrating on the areas where it's going to wear the most and where it's going to see the most battle damage or whatever, you know. So on his butt where he sits down, it's going to see a lot of wear and tear. So you're going to put a lot of stippling on that. It's going to be a lot of extra extra wear on the posterior. And the main thing here is you want to just be careful that you're not hitting you know, the boots or anything else that you don't want to have blue. That's the main thing here. So you're just being careful about that. If you do hit it, it's not the end of the world. You know, it just means that you have to clean up after yourself, which is annoying, but it's not, as I said, it's not the end of the world. It's just a little annoying. So you're just going to do that stippling thing. We're going to do the same thing on the knees. Stipple, stipple, stipple. I went a little heavy there, but again, going a little heavy is not a big deal. It just means you need to back off the throttle a little bit. I try to get in there just a tad, bunk, bunk, just a little bit. And same thing on this side, just go very, very carefully in between those things so I don't mess up any of the stuff around it. That's pretty much it right there. That's the stippling. And that's some very basic highlighting that I've done using several different techniques that you can find useful depending on what kind of texture you're getting or that you want to get. And the nice thing about this is that I've also shown you that something that most beginning artists in miniature painting don't actually do, which is creating a variety of textures on the same model, okay? Most beginning miniatures are gonna just do layering on everything, okay? What I've showed you is several different techniques, all very, very simple and all that only require, you know, very basic techniques and just a couple brushes. And again, I'm assuming at least one of them is an old brush. If you really wanted to with that stippling technique, you could even take like an old toothbrush and just cut off a bunch of the bristles that you don't need, just have like a few at the end, and you could use it with an old toothbrush if you wanted to. And you could stipple with that. So if you don't even have a second brush, you could do it that way. Now the one thing I did do is I did mess up right there on that one strap, so I'll have to go back and fix that. But other than that, I think he's pretty close. We're gonna do his teeth, and then I think I'm not gonna do his guns metal because I don't want to make you buy another set of paint. I'm just going to show you how to make it look a little bit more like it is metal, and we'll come back for that in a second. Okay, So we're back. I went ahead and mixed up a kind of a close approximation of that strap color here. It might not be perfect, but it's gonna be close enough. Again, things in the real world aren't always perfect. Aren't always exactly the same. So if we don't get it exactly right, that's fine. And I'm just kind of fixing where I accidentally overpainted with blue. And then we'll come back and we'll rewash with some of the brown to get back in and kind of cover up those crevices. Not a big deal. Not a big deal at all. So once I fix that, next thing we're going to do is mix up a little bit of a tooth color. Now, orcs are not famous for their dental hygiene. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with this brown over here, or this kind of yellowy brown that we did for the leather distress. And actually what I'll do is I'll actually start off with what I was just doing for the strap color and just kind of add yellow into that. And so we're going to start with that for his dental work over here. It's kind of the base color for that. Because as I said, orcs are not known for their dental hygiene. And again, just as you're trying to get small into small spaces, just make sure you're as stable as you can be. That's kind of all you got to do. And if you mess up, no big deal. You can always paint over it again. This is also why we did the undercoat in black, is because I've already got, as you can see, a pretty good shadowy color, so that kind of makes it look like they all stand out pretty well, right? Once those dry out, or excuse me, once that layer dries, we'll go and highlight some of the tips of them. And so while I'm waiting for it to dry, I'm just going to add a little bit more white into the base coat that we did there, and a little bit of water, a little bit of white, a little bit of water, to make a lighter color of that yellowy, gross, bad hygiene, call your dentist kind of tooth color. Because the ends of the teeth obviously get used a lot, and so they're going to be clean just through sheer use, I think, right? Okay, and then once we have that, we can come back in and we'll just kind of make the little fangs here stand out just a little bit by highlighting them with that lighter color. That's it. Nothing too crazy on that. Now, I promised to show you how to make the pistol and the axe look a little bit more metal, right? So the way we're going to do that is just to kind of simulate, the idea that I'm thinking is that, a lot of firearms, start off with black paint on them, or black bluing they call it, on it. And then as they get used, some of that gets worn off, right? And then in terms of orc weapons in particular, they also can get rusty pretty easily. So what I'm thinking is that what we'll do is we'll actually show some of that bluing get worn off, kind of like how it's white on some of the edges there. And then we'll also show some rust stains and things like that to really sell that effect a little bit. And then we'll do the same thing with the axe. We'll, on the sharpened edge, we'll show where the black metal has been kind of ground off a little bit for sharpening, and then we'll also show some rust effects and things like that. And again, this is all, I hope, things that are well within your reach as a new painter, and things that'll be fun for you to try out and just experiment with them. This is intended to be a very fluid kind of exercise, nothing that's super hard, and things that you can have fun trying. So to start with, we'll go ahead and put a little bit of white paint on the palette. Again, just because I kind of messed up my other pile of white when I was dipping brown into it. And then, once again, I'm going to put a little blop of water over here on the side. You can see that, okay. Put a little blop of water on the side here. that I'm gonna mix some of that white into, because I want a fairly thin white pool to draw from, because I'm again going to be doing that glazing thing I was talking about. We're not really glazing, but I want to have a thin layer of white that I can make, because I don't want to overwhelm things with white. And if I have to, I do have black in my palette, but I haven't used any yet. And so if I don't have to actually add it to bring it out here, I don't want to do so. So, because so far, like I said, I think I've got a dark blue, a medium yellow, a burnt umber, and now burnt sienna, sorry, and then titanium white. So far I've only got a handful of paints, like 4 or 5, and if we can keep it that way, that'd be pretty cool. There was a guy that used to paint, he used to teach his students, this guy, Anders Zorn, I think his name, used to teach his students with just 4 paints, and I'm not that good, but I still like to keep things on the cheap for you when you're first starting out. All right, so the way we look at this is that wherever there could be wear and tear, we're going to kind of emphasize a little bit of this kind of with the white lines, and also we're going to try to fix where I got some green on there as well. Even though arguably where there's metal, the green could reflect, we're still going to try to fix that a little bit. So here I'm just going to take the side of the brush with that white, and I'm just going to kind of zip in there with that, like that, very, very gently, fixing it. And then on these little holes where they have the kind of venting, or I guess they're kind of cooling sorts of things, just kind of touch a little bit of the white there, very gently. Not too hard. If I go too hard, it's going to just flood the center or the middle of the hole, and then it's going to ruin the effect. I'm just trying to highlight the kind of the bottom edge of those holes to sort of indicate that the sun's above this guy, and so it's catching the bottom of the hole as it's worn there a little bit, and so it's going to catch the bottom edge. Just very gently, like I said. There you go. Very, very simple, but you know, it actually reads reasonably well from a distance, right? And then we'll do a little bit of the same thing, just kind of reinforce these corners with some of the white and reinforce the barrel. The barrel definitely is going to have wear and tear on it, and any weapon like this is just going to, especially with an orc, he's not going to pay attention when he smashes around in the bushes and whatever else. He's going to be using his pistol as a club as much as he uses his choppa as a choppa, probably. He's not going to care. And so we'll kind of get the edge of the barrel all the way around, just to sort of highlight that it's like that, and then we'll catch the inner edge over here. Like so, again, because I'm thinking the sunlight's coming like this, right? Okay. Okay, just kind of the inner edge of the barrel. And again, it's not perfect, right? It's not perfect, but from a distance, you might think that's, you know, kind of a metal thing, right? I think the grenade is probably in the good enough camp of things. I might make it darker if I had some black, but we're not going to bother with that right now. Now the hatchet, or the choppa rather, I think what I want to do here is just kind of emphasize the blade a little bit more, just a little bit. And again, I don't want to necessarily go full on non-metallic metal like I might if I was trying to get fancy. I'm not the best NMM painter in the world anyway, far from it, but I have done a little bit of it, and so I'm gonna just try to emphasize things just a little bit more here, and we'll see how it looks. And if you guys like it, then just let me know in the comments, and if you don't like it, then let me know in the comments too, and we'll try to do better next time. So again, just kind of emphasizing what's already there to start with. Again, just using the edge of the brush, or excuse me, the side of the brush, the rounded side, to kind of hit it on the sides like that. Just to sort of say, you know, this is sort of shiny and hard edges. And then what I'm also going to do, and this is using the tip, is kind of give this where the blade kind of turns and sharpens. I'm going to give that a little indicator as well. I'm not going to go all the way down the center of it. I'm just going to give it an indicator as it meets the other side, the side of the blade. It's almost cartoony that way, you know, just to kind of give the impression to the looker, or to the onlooker, that it's there. Right. Now, I also need to, on the outside of the axe, especially the hatchet, choppa, whatever, I need to kind of get these areas here. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm out of camera. I need to get these areas here for the same reasons that I got them on the that part of the pistol, and then I need to get this part that's broken and kind of give it a little bit of oomph as well to show that it's there. And then I don't have to get like every single spot right. I don't have to make them all exactly the same either, because if you look at metal, and especially if it's, again, like a black metal kind of situation where you're really trying to highlight where the metal's been damaged and the black part's been worn off, you're not trying to get everywhere. You're just trying to get the spots where the black's worn off, and you're trying to kind of highlight that, you know what I mean? So that gives it a little more flexibility to not make it a perfect MM kind of thing. You're just trying to say, all right, here is a spot that the sun's hitting it and it's glinting, you know what I mean? So I'm just trying to use the white to kind of do that and say, look, right, here's a damaged spot, sun's hitting it, it's glinting, right? The corner here, you know, the spot right here, and this is also why I went with a really thinned white, is because I can hit the same spot a few times and make it brighter by doing that. By hitting it more than once, I can make it brighter. Just to highlight those things and make them stand out more. Okay, now the real question is, do I want to take any of the spots that are like along the blade? Like, do I want to come in here and make it look like it's been ground more than that? I think I do. I think if I don't do that, then it's going to look just too flat. It's not going to look interesting enough. So I think we won't. I think we'll just kind of start off fairly thin, start off with that kind of wash consistency, and we'll just kind of go like this, so it looks like it's been used to chop things, you know what I mean? Just kind of make those scratches like I did with the leather. And I'm kind of going at an angle here with the assumption that the guy's kind of chopping down, and so it's going to make those angled scratches on the metal that I was talking about before. And again, I'm kind of going from in to out, from inside the blade to the outside of the blade, because when you use acrylic paints in specific, the last place that your brush touches is the place that the most paint will be deposited. So by putting my brush down first on the inside of the blade, up against here and drawing out, most of the paint will be deposited closer to the edge of the blade, and the least amount of the paint will be deposited towards the belly of the blade. So least amount up here, most amount up here, and that's exactly what I want, because I don't want there to be a ton of white up along the belly of the blade. I want it to be mostly towards the edge. So this side. All right, I'm gonna let that dry for a little bit and just see if we like it once it's dry. What do you think? All right, yeah, I think that's probably gonna be good enough as in terms of reading, as if it's a well-used choppa as far as the metal part goes. Next thing we're gonna do while we're waiting for the choppa itself to dry, I'm gonna take and use some of my burnt sienna here to make some rust effects. And the way I'm gonna do that is, again, I'm gonna take the burnt sienna itself, the full strength one over here, I'm gonna put it right over here. And we're gonna look at places where the rust might have collected, okay? You know, on a well-maintained piece of equipment, it's not gonna collect at all, obviously. But on an Orky piece of equipment, it's gonna collect kind of in the seams of places. So like up under here, maybe up under here, probably not in the actual action over here because it stopped working then. But yeah, seams, around bolts, maybe under the barrel. So we'll start with those kind of places. Again, we'll thin out the paint somewhat because we want it to be able to dribble a little bit, with the idea that, like, if it was wet out or whatever, then it might have run a bit. And we're just gonna kind of lay that in there like so, just to kind of give the hint of rust in those places. Kind of draw it down a little bit like it's dripping. And then what we can do, if we want to, we don't have to, but if we want to, we can come back and make a brighter version of that to really, really bring out the pop and make it brighter. I probably will in a couple places, you know. The other thing is that this panel here that we did before with the circles on it, that is usually on a real weapon. It's made with a lower quality metal usually, and so it's more likely to rust and just kind of have like flecks of rust all over it. So I'm going to take the thicker version of that, and I'm just going to kind of tap. I'm not stippling this time. I'm tapping with the side of my brush after having less on it. I'm just going to tap little splotches of rust on there, and then we'll definitely highlight those with a brighter orange, and hopefully that'll really look good when we're done on the inside and out. Yeah, so those are, like I said, it's a cheaper metal usually, and so it usually rusts more easily than the main body of a weapon. And then on the hatchet, or choppa, I keep saying hatchet, I don't know why. On the choppa, it's going to be mostly, we'll say, like in the bolts, around the bolts is mainly where we have the rust. And then maybe the handle. Okay, now we're gonna have to wait a little bit for that to dry. And while we're waiting for that to dry, I'm gonna get a few things, and then we're gonna mix up some stuff to do as base, because you can't have a good looking miniature without having some base effects done. But again, we don't wanna make you guys spend money on expensive basing material. Okay, basing time. So what I have on my palette now is just regular white glue. Again, there's other materials you can use, but we're starting with what we have at home, hopefully. And I got some toothpicks. I also cut myself a little piece of sprue, which is a little bit better than the toothpicks for application of the glue, I think, just because you can kind of use it as a scraper. You can kind of like scrape it onto the base like so, and it's a little bit bigger and chunkier. So going to start off by just sort of applying the bigger areas with glue, and it's actually okay and perfectly fine if you get some of it on the boots of the guy. It's going to look pretty good that way, in my opinion. So start off by just putting it all over there. You can use an old brush for this too. That's fine. I was just, again, not trying to assume that you had old brushes laying around, except for the one you use for stippling, I guess. This is a little bit detailed for doing with a toothbrush, I think, for an old toothbrush. And then for the areas that are a little bit too fine for that piece of sprue to go into, you can kind of get it with the toothpick, like so. Okay, so you just gotta get the glue all over the place, right? Then the next thing you want to do, excuse me, send down. I have a jar right here. It's just like playground sand, and I got like some little flecks of stones that I found in places, and whatever. You can use pretty much any old junk here. The only thing you want to make sure is that if you get dirt or anything like that, you want to put it like on a sheet with some parchment paper and dry it out in your oven for a while, just to make sure that anything in there is dead and dried. You also want to clean off the edge of your rim with your finger, because you don't really want the stuff to stick on the overhang. You can do one of two things. You need to dip it all the way in there or sprinkle. I prefer the sprinkle method, and I'll tell you why. It's because I can control where it goes and not put the exact same stuff everywhere on the base, and I can kind of mix it up a little bit. The other thing to note is that depending on what size your playground sand is, it's some of it's like big enough that if it's at scale, it's more like gravel to these guys than it is like sand. So I'm going to do that to start with. I'll tap off a little bit to get rid of the excess, sit him down, and then I'm going to take baking soda, which is finer grained than sand is, and I just have a little jar of it. You can take it right out of the box if you want to, but it's just baking soda. And then do the same thing and kind of dust it on there. And it's okay if you get it on the guy. And then tap it off when you're done. Now, don't breathe it in, so kind of stay back from breathing. Let that sit for a little while, and we're gonna wait for it to dry completely. And fortunately, it'll dry, the other stuff will dry, and then we'll kind of blow it off and we'll finish up the model in the next segment. Okay, last little bit on finishing up the miniature. As you can see, all the paint's pretty well dry now. The glue that we used to put the basing material on is dry. If you look relatively closely, you can see we've got some rust in there, some rust streaks. It's fairly dark brown, red, brown, kind of dark orange, whatever you want to call it. The axe, I think, looks pretty decently metal from a distance. I think the pistol does as well, reasonably well. The ground, to me, looks like ground, frankly. I think, you could go ahead and paint that if you wanted to, but I think you could also just leave it as it is. It's got some good, nice variation in color, and it looks reasonably like ground. So it's pretty much your choice whether you wanted to paint that or not. I personally would probably leave it just like it is, because it looks pretty interesting already. The chest piece, or excuse me, the leather on the chest that we did before, I could go either way with it. I could leave it like it is. I could darken it a little bit. I think for the purpose of this tutorial, I'll probably just leave it because I see no reason to change it. I think that adding some interesting variety and variation across the miniature in terms of wear and tear, as I've said before, is perfectly valid, perfectly fine approach. So the last step, I think, is really just to punch up that rust a little bit to make it a little more visible. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to take our burnt sienna that we have back down here still wet, nice, excellent. We're going to take some of that, and then we're going to get some of our yellow, because what we're doing is we're taking this kind of red-brown and we're trying to add some yellow to it to make it more of an orange-brown, a brighter orange-brown, as it were. So I think my yellow is dry over there, so I'll add a little bit more to it. Probably don't need a ton to brighten up that burnt sienna into an orange, but we might, we'll see. As I've said earlier in the tutorial, the hard part about yellow is it's very transparent as a color when you're dealing with acrylics. And so sometimes it's hard to figure out how much coverage you're going to need with it in order to get the effect you're looking for. So in this case, we almost might want to start with yellow and work our darker. Yeah, in fact, I think that's what we're going to do. We're actually going to squirt out a bunch of yellow and add the burnt sienna into it until we get the orange we want, rather than going the other way around. So taking the burnt sienna from over here, adding it into the orange, or excuse me, into the yellow to create an orange. That's what I was trying to say. A little more burnt sienna. Again, we're just trying to create a kind of a brighter orangey brown kind of color in order to get something that kind of reads as rust. Doesn't have to be perfect, like I said. Nothing in nature is exactly the same, and you know, we're also dealing with an alien world, so who knows what the rust looks like, you know. So then we come in here and we just look for those spots of rust we did before, and we just kind of pop it in there into the middle of those to brighten up wherever the rust was, just in the center. You don't want to completely cover where you had the rust before. You just sort of having little flecks of brighter rust in the middle of the darker rust. And then that will sort of make it seem like there's different you know, ages of rust to it. There's different types of rust kind of growing on each other, that sort of thing. So that sort of approach is usually pretty effective. And of course, you know, you can always get yourself an orange if you want to. You can get, if you find out orange you like the color, just grab it and use it. Again, this tutorial is entirely intended to just sort of minimize the number of paints you have to buy and show you how you can get a long way by just mixing your own from just a few that you're starting with, and then grow your collection as you have specific needs for special colors, rather than, you know, feeling like you need to have all the paints all at once up front and, you know, spend a couple $100 on getting a collection of paints instead of focusing on just learning the techniques and having fun with it. You know, nobody wants to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars only to find out, well, you know, that hobby's really not for me. I mean, everybody I hang out with that's tried the hobby's enjoyed it, but there are people that don't. So, you know, like I said, try it, don't spend too much money on it first. And if you enjoy it, come back. And there's certainly plenty of people who are willing to take your money, but make sure you enjoy it first. Okay. And then once again, as with all the other things, you know, once the paint dries, you can always come back and punch it up a little more if you want to, make it a little more bright and obvious. And there we go. Rusty pistol, a little bit of rust on a well-used axe. And I think our boy's done. Thanks for watching. If you stayed all the way to the end, thank you so much. This was the longest video I've edited so far, and while I had fun, I appreciate you all sticking with it to the end. I'm not going to make it any longer by dragging out the ending. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. As always, please let me know what you liked and what I could do better. Give me your thoughts on what you'd like me to cover in the future, and of course, keep on looting.